Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. It is Saturday night, December 1st, 2018, and it is Saturday night speculation with Smaulgld. Tonight's topic: is a gold standard really a good idea? We hear a lot about in the gold community, hearkening back to a day they never knew, that somehow the gold standard would solve all of their problems, all of the world's problems. But we're going to take a look at some of the downsides to a gold standard, but mainly from the perspective of those holding gold. It's one of those careful what you wish for circumstances, and then we're going to take your comments as well on whether the gold standard is really a good idea. I'm sure if I took a poll before we started, almost everyone who is interested in gold would say yes, yes, yes. And I think after you consider it, you may not be as keen on it. But maybe you still will be. Okay, before we get into the topic, let's take a look at now the gold and silver prices are done. They're closed for the weekend. Gold stayed about the same at $12.22 during the week. Silver fell a bit, went down a little bit, down to $14.15. And the unsustainable gold-silver ratio is about 87 to 1. 5 years of hearing that drivel. Unsustainable should be 16 to 1, 9 to 1, 1 to 1. Silver is rarer than gold. All that stuff. Greatest wealth transfer in history. When the world realizes what I know, then silver will go skyrocketing and so on. Okay, well, that didn't happen. Now, let's take a look over at what is trading now, which is Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin up 5% at 41.77. Not sure if we've bottomed yet, but there's been a couple of moves above 3,400, 3,500. Clearly up about 15% off the recent bottoms. Bitcoin Cash, however, not doing so well. 172, up 2%. Ethereum up 5% at 117.28. Litecoin up 8% at $34.15. Ethereum Classic $4.80. And let's take a look now. Speaking of gold and silver, something I like to look at every week at the end of the week is the open interest in the gold and silver positions on the COMEX. And as you can see, the pretty much in the gold, the net positions both for the commercials, the non-reportables, and the non-commercials, they're all short. And there's fairly decent open interest. That doesn't mean that everyone is short. It just means on a net number of positions, they're more short than they are long. Now, generally, you could infer from that at some point they've got to close out their positions, or they could just roll them over into short positions again. There's nothing that says you have to go long after you've been short, but that generally happens. And over on the silver side, it's even more pronounced. Pretty much bearish sentiment across the board. Let's take a look at the silver. You can see there to the far right, both the blues and the reds, net short. Non-reportables minus 20, non-commercials minus 11, and commercials minus 9. And again, some fairly decent open interest all year since January. So a lot of contracts, a lot of silver being traded, so to speak, notional amount of silver being traded, but not really. All right, so let's now get into whether the gold standard is really a good idea, and we're going to offer some alternatives as well to a gold standard. We're going to look into also whether the Fed is the best entity to handle the money supply, whether it should be handled by the government itself through the Treasury, as most countries do, whether we should have competing currencies, or indeed a government-sanctioned gold standard. So let's take a look at whether the gold standard is really a good idea. Uh-oh, we got a moron here.
Presenting the distinguished international news commentator and foreign correspondent.
This has been an extraordinary week in world affairs.
No, I told Hillary Clinton that that's moronic.
Yep, sometimes a lot of things are moronic and we don't realize it. Now let's talk about the gold standard. I think that's something that a lot of people that hold gold, that like gold, think is, in some respects, the holy grail. The world was a tremendous place when we had a gold standard. You don't have any wars. You don't have this massive deficit spending. If you do it, you get penalized. You lose your gold. All right, but let's first talk about what a gold standard is. There's two types of gold standards. When we talk about the gold standard, I think people use them interchangeably, and they're two totally separate types of gold standards. There is the classical gold standard, and that was the one on which all countries were on it, and most big countries, between 1870 and to the outbreak of World War I in 1914. And briefly, without getting into the weeds on it, that type of gold standard required each country to peg its currency to a certain amount of gold. And what would happen is if you were running a deficit, you would lose gold. If you had a trade surplus, obviously the gold would flow in your direction, and you'd have this back and forth of the gold balance of payments. And obviously the producing nations would have more gold than the non-producing nations, and it all kind of balanced its way out. And the advantage of that type of gold standard is, in a sense, it is in a balance, and there's some real restrictions on what you can do, but some real benefits if you're doing well. You get more gold and your economy does better and you're in a better position, and you can't play games. You can't just decide, I've had enough of this, I can't have this situation, I'm just going to borrow more money, print more money, and create a wealth effect. And that's basically what you have in the world today. China has decided to bring a lot of production and wealth forward. They make stuff they don't need. They build bridges they don't need. They make buildings they don't need. They lend money they don't have to entities that can never pay it back, but they build it anyway, and they create that wealth effect. And if you can debase your currency, then you get somehow an advantage in exports. So you can see without a gold standard what countries can do. And now the downside to that is obvious. The upside is that you can artificially stimulate an economy, which some might argue adds some type of societal benefit. But of course, others might argue that eventually you're going to have to pay the piper. You don't get something for nothing. So the first type of gold standard is a classical gold standard, and that's what some people think of when you say a gold standard. Other people think of the gold standard as what we had from 1944 to 1971, which was effectively a dollar standard. It really wasn't a gold standard. It was under the Bretton Woods agreements. At the end of World War II, towards the end, countries met up in Bretton Woods in New Hampshire in the White Mountains and decided that the solution they all came up with was that the dollar would be the currency they all use as the international payments. And to get everyone to do that, the U.S. was going to allow countries to redeem their dollars, or central banks, in gold. That didn't mean that the people in the country could redeem gold from their treasuries, or that Americans can go to the bank and get gold for their money. No, it just meant that central banks, as part of their trade agreement, could bring their dollars that they had acquired in trade back to the U.S. Treasury, and they would get gold for them at a fixed price of $35. Now, prior to the Bretton Woods agreements, or actually about 11, 12 years earlier, Americans used to have gold in their pockets as part of their currency. They had silver as well, and they could also turn their dollars in, get gold certificates, and actually receive the gold specie. That went away in 1933 when Roosevelt, pursuant to Executive Order 6102, decided that no, you can't have gold anymore, and you had to turn in all the gold coins. Those are the coins and other gold they acquired that they melted down and between 1934 and onwards, and then built Fort Knox, which opened in 1937, and they stuffed all the gold in there. Separate topic. So under the Bretton Woods gold standard, however, the one from 1944 to 1971, central banks could redeem the gold. Now, under the original gold standard, the classical gold standard from 1870 to 1914, the gold price was fixed by the United States in 1834 at $20.67 an ounce. That price held. Now, keep this in mind when we start talking about gold standards. The price of gold was $20.67 from 1834 to 1933. When, right 6 months after Roosevelt confiscated the Americans' gold and paid them their $20.67, pursuant to the Gold Act of 1934, passed in January of that year, they revalued by government decree gold to be $35 an ounce. So gold was $20.67 an ounce from 1834 to 1934. Then from 1934 onwards, the gold price was fixed at $35. And it stayed there until about 1974, around 1971, when Nixon took the world off the gold standard. Now, how did Nixon take the world off the gold or the dollar standard under Bretton Woods? Just went on TV and said, guess what? You're thinking about bringing, he didn't say this in these words, but effectively it was, if you're thinking about bringing your foreign currency to the United States to get gold, when you get here, we're not going to give it to you. So forget about it. And that effectively ended the Bretton Woods Agreement. The president just came out and said, sorry, no more gold for you to have. You have dollars, and that should be good enough for you. Dollars are dollars. And from now on, dollars are based on the strength of a nation's economy. And that was what he said that the dollar was based on and nothing to do with gold anymore. So turn your boats around because you're not getting any gold, or you can park here and you can go visit the United States, but you're not picking up any gold. Now, if you look at what happened at the end of both, how did both the classical gold standard and the Bretton Woods agreements end? The government just decided we're ending them. Why did the classical gold standard end? Was it working? Yeah, it was working fine. But they wanted to fight wars. You can't fight a war if you have a gold standard. So they said, okay, wash your hands of this. No more gold standard. We're going to start printing money. We're going to start making bombs and invading countries. And there's no more gold standard. So the gold standard didn't prevent the war. People think, oh, if you have a gold standard, you can't print money, you can't do this, you can't do that. Yeah, and as the gold pumpers say, until you can't, or till you can. Because if a government decides they've had enough of the gold standard and it's not helping them, what are they going to do? Who's going to stop them from saying we're not going to do this anymore? The people? No. They want to fight a war. They say no more gold standard. Bye-bye. Goes away. What happened to the Bretton Woods Agreement? Nixon realized, the Treasury realized, whoa, hold on a minute. Countries are getting smart to the fact that we have a limited amount of gold here in the United States. We're running trade deficits. We're running budget deficits. And they're starting to realize in 1968, 69, that gold at $35 an ounce, that's a good deal. Because that's the same price as it was in 1934. And such a good deal that we might as well take advantage of it. Why? Well, in retrospect, they were right. The United States could either run out of gold or tell them one day, go pound sand, you're not getting any. So what did they do in the 60s? France, Germany, Switzerland, they started upping their gold redemptions. Total right to do it under the Bretton Woods Agreement. They showed up and they had to get the gold. And finally, Nixon said, sorry, you're not getting it anymore. So again, the gold standard, that gold standard didn't stop anything. It was only a temporary fix until countries realized it didn't work for them, or it was working too good for them, and the United States had to stop it. Now you notice in both gold standards, and we'll come back to this, a very important feature. The price has to be fixed. It was fixed at $20.67 for 100 years. Now, that's despite how much gold might have been found during that time period. The change in the size of the world economy didn't matter. Price was $20.67 because it kind of has to be. To have a gold standard, you can't have the price fluctuating up and down. And the same thing with the Bretton Woods Agreement from 1944 to 71. They fixed it at 35. Now, there was talk about revaluing the price of gold higher, but you know what that would have done? That would have devalued the dollar. And since the United States wanted to be the strong dollar, they didn't want to revalue gold. So they didn't do it. And that's why they even came up with the SDRs. They didn't come up with the SDRs to be a world reserve currency to crush the dollar globalist dream. And then the SDRs were basically, they were concerned that there wasn't enough gold and dollars in the system because the price was fixed at $35 to cover international trade. So they thought maybe they could add liquidity by inventing these special drawing rights, the SDRs, and give them out to central banks, and they could use them in that sense. That's the only reason they came up with SDRs in 1969. They weren't designed to crush the dollar and all this other nonsense about Rothschilds and I'm digressing here, but the point is they came about as a product of the restrictions that a gold standard places, especially if you're going to try to fix the price. Now, obviously, what's happening is there is demand for gold outside of its monetary value when you had a gold standard. Obviously, people got married, they bought engagement rings, they had jewelry. Indians liked jewelry. Now, the good news back then was Indians didn't have any money in the 50s and 60s the way they have now, and so they weren't that big of the gold buyers that they are today. Same with the Chinese. They were still part of, under Mao and the Chinese communism, so there wasn't a lot of consumer demand in India or China for gold. So basically, they were able to keep the price of gold at $35 an ounce. And the other problem you had with the gold standards, the bulk of the free world's gold was coming from South Africa. So basically, they were partially in charge of the money supply because gold had to come out of South Africa. So they had to work 24/7 to supply the world with gold because Russia, at the time, was part of the Soviet Union. They were another major gold producer, but they weren't putting their gold out on the market. And then they had to track whether they had to count the gold available not in the free world as part of the overall gold. It got pretty messy. So it wasn't ideal. But the worst part about the gold standard for Bretton Woods was it really wasn't a gold standard. It was a dollar standard. To put one country in charge of and say your currency has to be backed by gold and everyone else can come and raid your gold, well, that works as long as the country like the United States has a net surplus and then the other countries are never going to accumulate dollars. But once it works the other way around, they start bringing their dollars back, the gold's going to run out at the United States. Some people say U.S. defaulted. Not really. I think it was default set in to begin with. You can't expect that situation where the United States is going to be permanently a net exporter and the engine of the world and therefore have all the gold. Because as you see under the classical gold standard, it's intended that there's ebbs and flows in commerce and that sometimes some countries do well and other times they don't, and that's their gold balance has changed. With the United States, at some point it was just destined to have all of its gold drained. So it didn't really work. And again, both gold standards ended when the governments just said, screw this. We're not doing this anymore, precisely for the reasons why people want them. They think that the gold standard restrains government until it doesn't. And that's exactly what happens. They decide it's not working for us. It's too restrictive, so we're not going to do it. And that's why I think, even though some people want it, I don't think any government today wants it. Why would you put the handcuffs on in advance? Well, they'd be forced to. Who's going to force them? They decide. They decide we're not going to do it. China would never do it. Last thing China wants is to have those golden handcuffs on when they need to pump the economy up. And most countries, no country really wants to have that type of restriction on it. The politicians like to print money. They like to make promises they can't keep. They don't want this type of restriction on them. And as you see, even when they have self-imposed a restriction on themselves, it doesn't last. But let's take a look now at what this would mean for, let's say you still find it attractive and you think, well, it'd be great. The countries would, they'd all agree to restrain themselves. We'd end this debt Ponzi scheme and everyone would be happy and there wouldn't be any wars because they couldn't print money to create wars and everything would be fine. Well, here's the problem with that. You know that's not going to last. Secondly, you know they're going to have to fix the price of gold. Whoa, they're going to fix it higher. Okay, well, you're going to get a one-time windfall because then the price of gold is going to remain the price of gold forever until they decide they've had enough of the gold standard. So what would you do? Like right now, if you're concerned about government printing, government over, whatever you're concerned about, fiat currency, devaluation, you have gold. You're allowed to have gold. And the gold price can reflect the impact on the abuse of your home currency. Under a gold standard, you got nowhere to go. You can't go and sell your gold for more than it's worth because it's fixed at a certain price. And sometimes they'll just confiscate it from you, so now you can't even own it. See, when gold is not part of a gold standard, it's no threat. No one's going to come to your house and steal your gold or your silver. I mean, the government's not. Someone might come to your house and steal your gold and silver. But the government's not going to come and take it. Why? Because it's not part of the monetary system. But by definition, if you have a gold standard, they have to control the gold supply. They have to control the gold price. In most instances, they don't want you to have it. Remember, during the Bretton Woods Agreement, Americans were not allowed to own gold. They were prohibited from 1933. by the Roosevelt Executive Order 6102, and the Bretton Woods agreements were passed in 1944, agreed to in 1944, lasted till 1971 when Nixon tossed the U.S. off the dollar standard backed by gold, and it wasn't legal to own gold in the United States until the end of 1974 by, I think it was an executive order by Rudy Giuliani, no, by Gerald Rudolph Ford, President Ford at the time. So when you have a gold standard, you have a fixed price, and in some instances, you can't even own it as an individual. So today, if you want to protect yourself against devaluation of currency, you could buy gold. How do you protect yourself against a government who is... How do you even know they even have the gold? So you're basically fixed at that price. You may get the one-time windfall, but who's to say they're going to stick to the agreement? Who's to say all the countries are going to stick to the agreement? Remember, if all the countries don't stick to it, then it's not really an international classical gold standard. It's just some restraining themselves and others not. And that could be an advantage for the countries that aren't. Let's say all the world goes on a gold standard and China says, well, no, we don't want to do that. We want to continue to produce cheap goods and send them to you. Well, it's not going to work. And it'll work to China's advantage for a period of time, and then eventually they'll collapse because of their debt. But the point being is that a gold standard does not protect you. It only gives all of the gold and the means of controlling the gold to the government. If you think you got manipulation now, it's 100% manipulated when you have a gold standard. And we saw this when we had the Bretton Woods agreements. You've heard of the London gold pools. They were struggling desperately to try to keep the price at $35 an ounce. How could the price of gold still be $35 an ounce from 1933, and it's now 1968, and the price is still the same? How could the price of gold be $20.67 from 1834 to 1933? You basically take the market for gold, it just goes away. There is no free market for gold, which means you can't, quote, protect yourself. So, well, I'm going to go and get silver. It's not the same thing. And maybe that would be your go-to metal. Actually, if you wanted to be, if you thought that somehow going to a gold standard would benefit you, it would only benefit you on the one-time price increase if they revalued it higher, which they obviously would have to. They couldn't keep it at the current price. And then perhaps the silver would be the go-to metal if you couldn't own gold, or if they were going to fix the price of gold and there'd be a revaluation of silver. And that might float, because if you don't have a bimetallic standard, then silver would float according to the dictates of the market. And as a quasi-monetary metal, if gold was remonetized as part of a gold standard, then silver might grab a lot more monetary value. So it could be for silver people that a gold standard might make sense. But for gold people, it's a one-time windfall, and then they may not even allow you to own it. So also with a gold standard, you're dependent on mining production. Now, would it be fair for the countries that just happen to have, and I say fair, what I mean is economically fair. And the reason I say economically fair is generally today we find that the countries that have the most dynamic labor forces, the most intelligent labor forces, highly skilled labor forces, best policies for economy, they're the richest nations. China's doing well because it has an industrious workforce, has government policy that's arguably for production. It may be overproduction, it may be debt-driven production, but it's still production. Same with the United States, Western Europe, Japan. And then there's countries that one might consider backwards third world, but they just happen to have a lot of gold. Well, do they gain more power just because they happen to be located in an area where there's gold mines? Looks like I got cut off again. Yeah, it happens all the time. I was talking about South Africa. Maybe that did it. I don't know. What I'm saying about when you have a gold standard, countries that don't necessarily have the most industrious workforces, the best policies, they may end up becoming richer, gain more geopolitical influence than they otherwise would have had. And I was talking about China. right now, China has a very industrious workforce, and so therefore they're reaping the benefits of their labor, and that would allow them, even under gold standard, to obtain wealth, whether that's in fiat wealth or buying gold or whatever it would be. But under a gold standard, the countries that actually produce the gold would actually gain more economic influence and more geopolitical significance, just as South Africa once had. And really, South Africa was not a vibrant economy during the time where they had apartheid, especially, and they're not anymore now. They had geopolitical significance because they had a lot of gold. So that's something you have to look for when you have a gold standard, is it actually shifts the balance of power just to a resource-rich country rather than a country that may have a more... Well, look at Japan. Now, Japan doesn't have any resources, but yet it does very well. Well, they would lose the benefit or the advantage of that if they were on a gold standard, because a lot of the countries that had more gold in the ground might gain more prominence, especially if they were to up the price of gold to, let's say, $20,000, $30,000 an ounce in order to implement the gold standard. There'd be a shift of wealth, and really for doing nothing, just for having exploitable resources in their country. And then the other issue is, who's going to hold the gold? Do you trust the governments to hold the gold? Look at people today. The other day I did and I've been talking about it for the last week, about the gold at Fort Knox. I say it doesn't matter if there's gold at Fort Knox, because the United States is basically saying that the strength of the dollar is based on the strength of the economy. Who cares whether we have gold? And the other point I make is, if it was that important for the U.S. to have gold, it doesn't cost that much to buy 8,000 tons of gold, and it can be done. We see India buys 1,000 tons a year on the open market, so it could happen. But the point is, under a gold standard, it does matter. It really matters, because you're on a gold standard. If you're on a gold standard, who has the gold? Are they double counting the gold, triple counting the gold, rehypothecating, all that stuff? Well, then it becomes really important to know who has the gold, and can you trust all the custodial arrangements. Look what you had during World War II. Everyone in Europe sent their gold to the United States to the Fed, then they had a devil of a time trying to get that gold back from the Fed. So it's not that clear how a gold standard would work with the custodialists. Yeah, you could probably put it on the blockchain and all that other stuff, but it's not as easy. It's very messy to have a gold standard too. There's trust issues. And then one country decides it wants to go to war, and it says, oh, we're going to go again war against you, Germany. Oh, and we just happen to be holding 2,000 tons of your gold. Well, thank you for that. That's now our gold. And then the whole system breaks down. And again, how are you going to protect yourself against government overreach? How are you going to stop the government from just ending the gold standard or confiscating your gold? I would argue that you're better positioned today being able to protect yourself with the gold and the silver, because the government's not interested in attaching them to the financial system. Now, the other options are, we have a Federal Reserve that's supposedly independent, and they conduct monetary policy. And right now, for example, you got Jerome Powell wants to raise rates. Trump doesn't want him to. So the Fed supposedly is independent. They can do what they want. They could say it's not in the interest of the country to not raise rates. We're going to continue to raise rates. Okay, well, what if there was no Federal Reserve, as there are in other countries? What if it wasn't a private bank with that independence? What if it was just part of the Treasury? What do you think Trump would be telling Munchkin to do? Lower interest rates, take them down to zero like everybody else, print the money. Well, it's even more unrestrained than with the Fed. I mean, the Fed, we gave them the bad rap for printing $4 trillion, and rightfully so, and then handing it out to their buddies, to a lot of the too big to fail banks. But if you had no Fed and you had the Treasury doing it, and you had a Republican or a Democrat president, where do you think the money would go? They'd print up money and they'd send it to their buddies. So you do have an interest in having some type of restraint. Well, let's go back to the gold standard. Well, they can't do that. Well, there's your advantage of the gold standard. So there's pros and cons to both. Neither one is perfect, and I'm not sure that one is superior to the other. Now, a third alternative, the one I like, is basically kind of leave everything the way it is, but you create legislation and you don't make a gold standard, you don't put a bimetallic standard, silver standard, you basically allow for the free trading of private currencies, including gold, silver, cryptocurrencies, chits, whatever it is that you want to have. And I think in that system, you get a competition of money. Government can still issue its money and still insist that you use it, which will give it its underpinning of value, because if you have to have it, it's just like the petrodollar, right? If you have to have dollars to buy oil, well, then the price of dollars is going to stay relatively high. If you have to, legal tender laws, if the legal tender laws say that you have to pay debts owed to the government in dollars, and they have a lot of tax, there's always going to be demand for the dollars. But then you can allow the other currencies, the gold, the silver, the Bitcoin, and so on, to trade freely. All right, let's see what you guys think. But I'm not sold on a gold standard. I'd rather have the option to have the ability to privately hold gold. All right, let's go and see what we got. Sorry, I got cut off again. It happens all the time. It's, I don't know. I think that YouTube does not like the game-changing mug stackers. They don't want the mug stackers to hear what the chief mug stacker is saying at Smaulgld. All right. Max Strong says, greeting. Roger Henley says, I'm late. Well, sorry about that. Copper Bullion Standard, says Max Strong. Low energy jab. Oh, yeah. George Herbert Walker Bush died today. Max Strong says that for mixing a mixture of competing currencies. You know, that's pretty much the Friedrich Hayek point of view. Allow those to go out there. I know other people like Hoppe says, no, you have to have a gold standard. Everyone has a different point of view. And they're all, and actually, we were talking about a debate last night. That's something you can debate, because there's pros and cons to all the ways that money can be controlled, not controlled, how money is brought into the system, what can happen, what cannot happen. That's an interesting debate. And there are people that have done it. Who decides the value of the standard, says Partisan Gorilla. Right. Well, as we talked about, gold, $20.67. Actually, there's a funny anecdote to that, Partisan Gorilla. Can there ever be such a real thing that is true to value, arbitrary, not manipulated? When Roosevelt took the gold in 1933 under Executive Order 6102, and they set the price, they didn't set the price. They did not set the price when they confiscated the gold in 1933. As I mentioned, it wasn't until January 1934 when Congress then revalued the price of gold at $35. So the price had been $20.67, and that's what they gave to people when they were turning their gold in. From May 1933 to December 1933, Roosevelt and his Treasury Secretary, his name is Morgenthau, Roosevelt in his pajamas would set the price of gold. True story. It's in a book. I can't think of the name of it, but I'll get the footnote for you. He just said, yeah, well, it sounds like a good number. And that's how crazy it is. Totally arbitrary. And then Congress just says, okay, it's $35 an ounce. And there it sits from 1934 to 1974. That's why I don't like the gold standard, because you basically take all the free market out of creating a value for gold. Okay. Presidente Girl is here. No Pablo. Yeah, we don't see Pablo. He probably got his mug. He's probably wanting to spend quality time with his mug tonight. Not realizing you can do both. You can come to the... I got mine right here. You can come to the Smaulgld live stream with your mug. And if you're listening in the morning, you can use your Smaulgld classic or super classic mugs or your espresso mugs. But in the evening, you can use your beer mug. You can use your 22-ounce beer stein or your frosted 16-ounce mug. All right. Themat Tat. If General Sun Tzu was alive today and would think of performing a game-changing move, would he benefit from drinking from a Smaulgld mug? Yes, he was a mug stacker. We know that from historical notes. Mugs are real wealth. Any form of monetary system that maintains purchasing power of the currency provides truth and transparency. This is the Menta. Let's read that again. I'm going to make sure I'm not getting cut off. I got to keep toggling back to look at the feed, see if it's working. Any form of monetary system that maintains purchasing power of the currency, provides truth and transparency, enforces fiscal responsibility on government is good. True. Gold and silver historically worked. Yeah, but it worked until it doesn't, until they decide they don't want that transparency. They don't want, and that's the real yin and yang there, is you're still putting it in the hands of the government. The government, it doesn't have any restraint on it. Gold doesn't restrain a government. Remember, the government decides to restrain itself until it decides it doesn't want to be restrained. That's the problem I have with it. And then they've taken away your ability to protect yourself from them saying they don't want any more to do with this gold standard. They've taken the gold from you, and then they fixed it at $35. So how do you protect yourself against them going off the gold standard? You just have to hope that they don't. Well, that's not a good system to be in either. That's why I prefer to have everything, more stuff out in the open, and let the market be free and transparent rather than the government trying to set a free and transparent system, because a government's free and transparent system is only free and transparent to the extent that they wish it to be. But I do agree with the concept. Max Strong, government currency backed by labor and natural resources, crypto gold and silver for the banks, and local alternative, let's win, no fiat. Oh, that's not bad. The minute public can't redeem paper certificates, says the Mentat, it knows it's a sign government is lying and or spending more than its needs. Yes. And sometimes, and that's kind of what happened in the Bretton Woods agreements, only Nixon told them that was the case. That we're not going to be able to let you redeem your paper dollars for gold. But it's generally, they'll redeem them until they don't, and then what do? That's the problem I have, is we saw the silver certificate just went away in 1968. They said you can't do it anymore. Why? They were supposed to have the silver there. Well, they said, well, we don't have to have it anymore. They took the silver out of the currency in 1964. They said, look, it doesn't matter. You might as well get copper, nickel. It's the same thing, right? Quarter is a quarter. That's the problem. How do you force the government to stay with what they tell them to do? It's the same with the Constitution. They breached the Constitution. I mean, we're not even near what the original Constitution. I mean, you got court cases decide things that if you really were doing a strict reading of the Constitution would never happen. So that's the problem. When you give it to the government and you say, okay, fix it and make sure it all works, they'll say, yeah, okay, yeah, well, that's fine, that's good, that's fine. And then they decide they don't want to do it anymore. And what are you going to do? Make Mike Maloney proud, Lewis. Why would it have anything to do with Mike Maloney? All right, the French. Mike Maloney's the one who he called me out on one of his videos because I said there was no basis, no support, no source for the gold-backed yuan story that they were talking about. And of course there wasn't. He cited unbacked stories, unsourced stories. All right, the French are only good at destroying monetary systems. There's a lot of history there. That's true. Kareem R. Smaulgld is going Hollywood. Lewis takes on the Comex. The Mentat. No government or central bank wants a gold standard. Correct. But the only reason they may consider it is if there is no alternative to restore confidence in the national currency. That's the argument. But the thing is, I would say clearly in 1975, there were actually people in the central banks that thought that gold would restore confidence. There were people in the population that thought that. Today, no one thinks that. There isn't a mindset. It's 2 generations removed. You have bankers and you have people that don't think of gold as money. It's the first time really in the last 5,000 years that that's happened. And I equate that to, and people get mad when I make this analogy, horses were transportation for 5,000 years. And at some point, they stopped being transportation. They're still valuable. They could be used for transportation, but they're not. And I don't think if a lot of people got killed on the highway, they say, well, if you get a real catastrophe and we have these pileups all the time, they're going to return to the horse standard. I don't think so. But you could. I don't know. That's just my guess. That I think gold is past its prime as a monetary metal as part. I'm not saying they won't hold it as reserves. They do. But to bring it into the monetary system, they'd rather make up something than to restrain themselves with gold. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of practicalities there with who has the gold, who's going to mine the gold. It's still a very tricky thing to administer. To Matt, but perhaps they'll be able to sell something else to the government, a government-backed crypto. Yeah, see, that's not. I agree with you. That's probably what they do. Not that that's ideal. They much rather say, oh, we can artificially create X number of currency and everyone can see that we only have this amount. That was something they would go for. That's the mindset. We can create this fake currency, and every country can create a fake currency, and it'll be limited by, how many are there, and everyone can see it, and this will be the restraint that we need to have. I had a fly over my head. And that'll be the restraint that we need to give people confidence that we're not printing money. But I don't think they'd use gold. Eddie Cruz, always keep gold hide. Miser, they would completely adulterate a gold standard or destroy it. And then Joel notes that the audio is down. Yes, it was, as it's always gone. Not again, he's gone. Now you're back. Yeah, I try to get back as quickly as possible. I keep toggling to see if I've been shut off. Those who have the gold would have more power. Exploitable resources like oil, same thing. Absolutely, yes. When you have oil, that's definitely true. The difference, though, with having oil or natural resources that you can sell at higher, and I thought of that, is of higher prices. That's different, because if you exploit your oil resources, you can sell it for higher prices, whatever it is. But when it's money, it's different. It's because it's no longer a commodity when it's money. So when you're on a gold standard, it's not like today, it's okay that if Zimbabwe's got a lot of gold, more power to them. Let them mine it, let them exploit it, let them make the money off the gold. But it's different when it's not going to be sold at market price. It's going to be sold at a set price, and yet they're going to control a certain amount of the money. That's where it's different than oil. Oil, yeah, I'm not a socialist or a communist. Everybody's got to have a fair amount of resources. If you happen to be in land where you don't have a lot of resources, then you're like Japan and you still do well. If you happen to be in a country where there's a lot of resources like Brazil and you manage to exploit them, and that's good for you too. Maybe you don't have the most productive workforce, but at least you got resources. If you like the United States and China, you got both, well, then that's good for you. But when it's money and the world sets it arbitrarily that it's not gold as a commodity to sell and make jewelry out of and to sell for higher prices, but just to be part of the monetary system, there's something a little off there. But good point, mate. All right. DW, could the U.S. or any country buy 8,000 tons of gold? Yes. Not in 1 year. But remember, they mine 3,600 tons of gold a year. As I mentioned, DW, that India imports about 1,000 tons of gold a year, which means they buy it on the open market. It doesn't really drive the price higher. But I don't think someone could buy 8,000 tons in a year. No way. My point about the U.S. and the gold stand, Fort Knox. First of all, Fort Knox only has about 4,100 tons of gold. There's supposedly gold elsewhere. Let's say there's no gold at Fort Knox. And for whatever reason, it's the most important thing that you have to have it. And it's the most important thing that no one should ever find out about it. That amount of gold would cost like $160 billion to buy. You wouldn't buy it all in one shot. The United States mines 300-400 tons of gold a year, maybe about 250, 300 tons of gold a year. They can import some. They could easily build that back up. I don't think they've lost it, but the point is that they make it seem like somehow the United States is some impotent country. It's debt-ridden, and it just, like, you can't print up $100 billion and buy some gold and put it in a vault. It just seems far-fetched to me. Military strength is the standard, says partisan guerrilla. Well, there you go, that too. Wouldn't that force the price to the moon if U.S. purchased 8,000 tons of gold? Yeah, but they're not going to purchase it all at once. Remember, as I mentioned, India buys 1,000 tons of gold a year, and it does nothing to the price. Price stays the same. Price has gone down as they buy. Maybe if the U.S. started buying 1,000 ounces, 1,000 tons, maybe it might move the price a bit. But they wouldn't be that. They could buy, first of all, they could just get it from their own supply. I don't think it's a problem whatsoever. There's 3,600 tons of gold mined a year. There's a surplus. The supply is not tight. And who's to say the United States doesn't have the gold there in the first place? That doesn't make any sense to me. Joel says, let's be honest here, Smith & Wesson beats 999 every time. Yeah. I mean, gold basically, and it's not to denigrate it. It's perfect, as I say, as money. But it doesn't solve your problems. You can't eat it. You can't defend yourself with it. It's a nice, shiny metal. It's got tremendous properties. It's valuable, no denying it, but it doesn't solve the world's problems, as a lot of people think. Jim Rogers says all cryptos are going to zero to be replaced by government blockchains. Okay, and there's other people. Muhammad El Arian, who's probably a better investor than Jim Rogers, he says that if governments were to do government blockchains, that would validate the concept of private blockchains like Bitcoin. I happen to agree with Muhammad Al-Ari, not because he's richer than Jim Rogers, but because he's correct. A government blockchain, that's like saying fiat is going to be more valuable than gold. No. Why would it be? Gold is independent, and gold doesn't derive its value from the government saying it has value like fiat has. Compare that to government cryptos and private cryptos. Government cryptos, by definition, are not going to be decentralized. They're going to be more subject to hacking, and they're only going to have value because they want you to use them. They say they have value. Whereas the cryptos have independent value, and they're decentralized. So I don't think he's right. And the other thing is, when someone uses the word cryptos, like Jim Rogers or anybody, and they say they're going to zero, it shows they don't know what they're talking about. And I'll tell you why. What does cryptos mean? If a crypto means an ICO, then they have no idea what they're talking about. Here's why. An ICO is an initial coin offering, which is essentially a security, as the U.S. SEC has been saying. And why would an ICO necessarily go to zero? Why would any IP? That's like saying all stocks are going to go to zero. An ICO is no different than an IPO, other than the form in which you take the ownership interest isn't a share certificate, it's a digital token. So why would that go to zero? All cryptocurrencies are going to zero. They are a big Ponzi scheme. No, they're not. If you have an ICO and you have an interest in a company and it's through an ICO and it's a crypto, why would that go to zero? It'd be foolish to say that. But that's what people who don't really do any research, don't really know what they're talking about. They just want to have a point of view. They know enough to be able to hold a point of view, and that's all they need to know. All cryptos are going to zero. Jim Rogers says so, and that is all I need to know. Jim Rogers is a rich man. Okay. What else do we got? And I actually don't go for the idea that someone said this, and therefore, because someone said it, that person, because of who he is or who she is, makes it more valid. I really don't. I always look at each statement as, and I analyze it as a standalone statement. I don't attach it to somebody and say, well, Jim so-and-so says. Okay, the goal of the corporate shadow government is power to the military corporation, okay? Prashant Girl says, free market and money sounds best. All right, people are saying hello to each other here. Rolled oats and vegan water here, all right. Yeah, what every man should have. Why is palladium and rhodium going nuts? The charts look like they're totally to the moon. I know why palladium rose for a while, but you would think that that industrial demand would start to switch over to platinum, because now there's a significant premium of palladium to platinum. I really don't have the answer to that one. Government should be given power, period, says Prashanti Girl. I think she meant shouldn't. Real values and real things, says Mate. That's correct. Government's always going to steal. No-win situation. It's kind of what I'm thinking. I actually think we're better off without the gold standard. I think you give all the gold to the government. You let them fix the price. You let them control the supply. I'm not in favor of that. All right, indeed. To the Aussies in the house. Oh, you got Aussies here. Okay. Let's see. Do you guys like crypto, says Sith Shepherd. What's the difference between lobbying and bribery as full name? Nothing. Nothing at all. Other than lobbying is legal. Max Strong is researching crypto. Why does China want gold in the SDR? I don't think they do. I think that all that talk about the SDR is, I don't know what the purpose of it is. It's not a serious proposal. There's no one there. I mean, China is just trying to keep its oars in all the waters. It wants to create its own system. It wants to be part of the IMF system. But I think right now China's got more problems going on than try to figure out where they fit into the IMF and what portion of the SDR they're going to have and the composition. If they do the composition of the SDR every 4 years, we'll see what happens in a couple of years, what's in the SDR. But again, currently, the SDR is nothing more than an IMF creation. They hand out the SDRs, only they can create them, and they hand them out to the countries on the basis of what their size of them. And that's it. And then they can trade them amongst themselves, and they keep them on their balance sheets. They're essentially a non-issue. But they've been made a big issue. I'm not going to get into that story. All right. If crypto is treated as a stock trade the trend, never trade it, though. That's how I look at it. It's not whether I agree with it. It's not whether my view is, you guys have heard it before, is that Wall Street needs a bubble all the time. They had the housing bubble. After they had the dot-com bubble, then the housing bubble, then the everything bubble. They got to have a bubble. And everybody's saying, well, we're at the end of the line now. We've got sovereign wealth bubbles. We've got stock market's too high. Real estate's too high. And then everyone says, collapse, collapse. Yeah, I think the next thing is a crypto bubble. And you see them all making the moves for it. Fidelity, Goldman Sachs, TD Ameritrade, New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ. All these companies involved blatantly in trying to set up regulated trading platforms, storage solutions, derivatives, regulated, registered ICOs. It's all going to happen. And they're going to pump that stuff up. I don't know which ones are going to be the winners or losers, but that's what they're headed for. They know you can only get a few years out of each bubble, and then you can reflate them from time to time. But right now they need a new one because the everything bubble means they reflated all of them. So now they gotta go back and they gotta find a new one. And I think that's crypto. Right, government crypto won't be an orphan source. Same fiat. That's right. Just having a government blockchain, they actually already have government crypto. I mean, the dollar is the dollar. It's digital. You don't have dollars. You go to your bank, you don't get dollars. You see them on the screen. It's not much of an improvement to put it on the blockchain. If a currency got in trouble and gold would not save it, I don't know what would. Well, ASMR people, look at Kazakhstan. They have a horrific currency. They keep adding gold to the reserves. Doesn't help it. That's because the world doesn't value gold in the same way. Russia has a horrific currency. It's the most gold of any country. Doesn't help the price of or the value of the ruble. Let's see. Why not mate? No need for government crypto. Already have digit currency. Says mate. The crypto transfer system may be used by banks as safer. Well, that's what I said. The government blockchains are going to be much more subject to hacking, and they don't want to do that. One of the things that Sweden realized was, hold on a minute, we may not want to do the cashless society because if the Riksbanks were to go down and fall into the hands of the Russians, then we would not be able to. Yeah, if a country gets overtaken and they just control your money supply, you have no way of fighting back. Taximi get, you're done. I mean, you don't have the ability to finance the resistance. So a government blockchain isn't necessarily the best thing. And that's why a lot of them are pulling back from even that concept. Well, the dollar's going to collapse. That's the same old tired story at some point. Actually, Seth, other currencies will collapse, are collapsing before the dollar. The dollar is the last of the fiat currencies to collapse. And that might not happen in our lifetimes, no matter how young you are, because they all have a vested interest in propping up the system. The yuan will collapse before the dollar. Venezuelan's already collapsed. The Turkish lira has already collapsed. A lot of currencies will collapse before the dollar. And the reason for that is a lot of them rely on dollars for their financing, and they don't have enough of them, and then their currency devalues against the dollars, and they can just never get enough dollars, and then their currency falls even further. So I'm not a fan of buying anything because of the dollar collapse story. I would be a fan if I lived in a country who had a currency was more likely to collapse, and I would never hold that currency. I would never hold Turkish lira, Venezuelan this or that. All right. Let's see. What else do we got? One thing to keep in mind is if there's ever, since Nixon severed the link of U.S. dollars to gold, all nations on earth, apart from Switzerland up to 2000, have fiat currency. That's right. They're all on fiat currency. So you have to ask yourself, why would the dollar collapse? It's the link. It's the centerpiece of the fiat currency system. The dollar is the last one to collapse. This 50-year experiment is unparalleled in history. That's right. That's totally true. And the amount of debt was created. That's totally true. It's likely to end badly, gold, silver standard or not. Correct. Fritz Bender says, for now, I'm back to wait for cryptos, as are most people. And that's either a counter sign, a contrary indicator. Obviously, it's the old Warren Buffett. Be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. Well, so who knows? One argument for the cryptos is that they've gone through this kind of massive spike and dive 3 or 4 times already. That doesn't mean it's going to happen again. Each time it does collapse. People say that's it, that's over. I said that in 2014. Very surprised to see it come back. What I'm surprised is not just the resiliency of it, is the amount of money that's pouring into it. Now I'm seeing this Wall Street money pouring into it, and they haven't stopped even though the price has gone down. They still have plans to launch all these trading platforms in early 2019. There were 2 standards as part of Zingorilla: true free market and international bankers. That is correct. Let's see. Lobbyists run the U.S. and the U.K. I'd say anytime you have a government of a certain size, you're going to have lobbyists. Because if the government's large enough to dispense favors, then obviously people are going to lobby the people who are in charge of dispensing the favors. Yeah, why not allow the free market to set the price? You know the answer to that one. Okay, platinum is not an exact substitute for palladium, says ASMR people. That's right, they work as catalysts for different things. Find palladium to be a better catalyst. It requires less energy to change valence states. And then it becomes an economic issue, I think, is, you know, can you live with the palladium versus the platinum? All right, let's see. Saddam Hussein, dictators. Sarah Issels. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. That is a new comment from a new person. Any country holding their central bank reserves in dollars and trading U.S. dollars may be at the mercy of U.S. sanctions. That is absolutely true. Yeah, I mean, I done a few videos on this. Trump, especially, the king of bankruptcy, can just say China's been ripping us off and we're not getting anywhere, so we're going to call half their bonds in, or all of them, or they're going to take a haircut on them. That's absolutely right. Yeah, so if you have gold, like in your reserves, government can't devalue your gold unless they all go on a gold standard, but then in that case they probably revalue it higher. All right, everyone. Well, I want to keep this under an hour, and I think I've done that. I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight. Don't forget the Smaulgld mugs. Let me leave you a picture of them before, so you know what I'm talking about, because mugs are real wealth. Most of the people here already have their mugs. I might notice most of the names. They are mug stackers, and as they should be, but most people only have 1 or 2 mugs. They don't have the full suite of mugs. There's the, you're going to see here, the classic, super classic, the travel, and the espresso. But, as you know, we have added, get all these over at Smaulgld.com. We have added 2 new mugs, though. The beer stein, the 22-ounce beer stein, beautiful mug. And the frosted mug, which people don't understand how nice that mug is. It's 16 ounces. Sold a few of them, but far fewer than I thought we would have sold, given the, I'm going to show it to you. You really can't see how nice looking it is from the picture, but that is the frosted mug. And then, of course, the latest new big seller is the 22-ounce Smaulgld beer stein, and that is a beauty as well. Anyway, check them out at Smaulgld. You can check out the site. You can become a Smaulgld patron over on Smaulgld.com. You can buy gold from SD Bullion, Money Metals Exchange, Golden Eagle coins. You can buy coffee for your mug, both Hawaiian Kona and also other types of coffees, and it does help the site out a bit. So I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight, and we will see you again tomorrow night. Stack on.